Everything that we do, from our customer evaluations to the technology that we build to the roadmaps that we have, everything converges with one thing in mind, and that's to serve you, the customer.
Cherwell provides enterprise power without the cost and complexity.
I've got a system that I can customize with little training.
Never have to write a line of code and never need a developer level resource to touch the tool.
Having this portal and being able to integrate it with our existing SharePoint sites and being able to provide on-demand reports and searches.
Anything that you can conceive of that you need to automate and integrate, you can build.
Within days of receiving the product, it was plugged into our virtual environment.
It's a game changer.
Most of our competition, you'll find out, is built on old legacy technology.
We can get you up and running as quickly as possible, and yet you'll never outgrow us.
Our software and our technology was built on the latest, most innovative technology available today.
Whether you have it on-premise and bring it into our hosted environment, or take it from our hosted environment and bring it on-premise, it doesn't matter.
It's about people at Cherwell. It's in the relationships that we build.
At the end of the meeting, he turned to me and he says, "You guys have got the deal." And I said, "Well, why? What made the difference?" And he says, it's the way Cherwell treated us.
We don't get it right every time. We listened, we identified the problem, and then we worked through the solution together.
You need to be worried about your legacy. Your legacy is based upon the tools and the people that you employ and how cost effective and what the quality is. So keeping this simple and not expensive and easy to maintain saves you a lot.
Hello, my name is Mark Fay from Cherwell Software. We're a proud sponsor of TFT 2014, bringing great ITSM content to the world. Please enjoy this next presentation.
Welcome. My name is Peter Lijnse. I will talk to you about business and IT love, specifically around the BRM role. I'm going to share my screen so that everyone see the presentation. I am one of the managing partners of Service Management Art, and I've been involved in a lot of different things in the IT world, specifically IT service management. I started with ITIL basically in the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s. Recently, last year, I have been starting to be involved with Business Relationship Management Institute, and I'm presenting basically based on that. I will show you some of the links with IT service management, but specifically, I'm looking at business and IT alignment. If you want to connect with me on Twitter, feel free to send me a message or a question. For me, business, IT, there's this strange relationship, and I think it's very well presented by this this painting from Magritte, which is Les Amants, the Lovers. This is how this presentation all started, knowing that it's like we have two people basically in a relationship, but we don't really know a lot about each other. We don't really know what is happening, and we don't really know sometimes who we are, and that's what's triggered me first for business IT, specifically with the business IT alignment. So that's how the whole presentation started. Now in early last year, I did some presentations on business relationship management, and I came across the Business Relationship Management Institute. This is an institute that was set up early last year, sorry, and that's looking at training and certification for the business relationship management professional in the community. If you want to follow them on Twitter, again, there's the Twitter account. Now, a lot of the slides I'm using have come from the BRM Institute, so I definitely want to recognize them. I think it's a great way to actually start looking at more, okay, what is business relationship management and how can we actually use that? So the topics for this presentation are around business IT relationship management, and I specifically want to talk about the organizational capability. And then after that, after I've explained what the organizational capability is, I want to talk about the business relationship management, its role itself. And I think one of the key things is to have that role defined is an important part of building that relationship. So let me first talk about that organizational capability, but the first thing is the whole challenge. Since the end of the 90s, we've talked about aligning IT in the business. And a lot of IT organizations have had difficulties in accomplishing that. How can we better align? Some groups are not. And the whole problem is that we need to start making sure that business and IT work very well together. There's all different kind of challenges around that. Now, when I look at, okay, how do you find business IT alignment? I quite often come back to Luftman. Luftman did a lot of research on business IT alignment, and he focused on strategic alignment, focuses on activities to achieve cohesive goals across IT and business. And that means that that's making sure that we align the two entities basically. And achieving alignment is evolutionary and dynamic. And to be honest, I think in the beginning you try to align, but eventually you start to more fuse it together. You start to work together as a business group and an IT group. And nowadays I don't think you can, it's very difficult to separate it. And not being able to separate that is one of the challenges we see. Now, if we are very much distant from our business as an IT organization, we start seeing initiatives within the business that say we are going to do some of the IT service provisioning ourselves. And this is the next picture shows basically what I see as at this moment from a current situation perspective. We have an enterprise or an organization that has an IT organization in there, but we also have super users. We have in the business that know a lot about IT and actually do a lot of the support there. We hear the word shadow IT nowadays a lot. And we even have core business technology that the IT organization is not even allowed to support because it's so embedded in the business. And I've done some work with oil and gas, etc., where to get oil out of the ground, etc., you have to have very specific technology in place. But it is technology that links nowadays also because to the rest of the IT systems, because there is information in there. We see service providers in all different kind of areas. Now, one of my challenges I see in a lot of organizations, and I have to admit I briefly popped into Rob England's presentation, and that specific moment he was talking about enterprise governance of IT, and luckily he had the same message that I wanted to do. So if you want to know more about that, feel free to actually listen to his presentation. But the enterprise governance of IT lies with the overall enterprise. IT needs to be managed through the enterprise. That means that a shadow IT group or a super user or a core business technology need to be governed the same way as the IT organization. You can't make that different. Now, when I look at a business relationship management in general, but even in the role, what we quite often see is that we're sitting into the IT organization. But we are guiding the business. We are sitting with one foot maybe in the business and talking about core business technology. The shadow IT groups, why are they're showing up? Because they're quite often not excited enough about what the IT organization can do, and I'll show you some models around that as well. So we see a very complex environment at this moment. So this is really what we see as the current situation. I see enterprise governance of IT and business relationship management very closely related, because if you know there are groups within IT that need to be governed the same way, or are additions to what the IT organizations are doing, from a relationship perspective, we need to be aware of that. Luftman in '99 said, okay, well, you have, and this is just a list, I'm not going to go through all the details here, but strategic alignment, quite often, enablers are senior executive support for IT, and that's, again, comes back to that governance. IT needs to be involved in strategy development. IT needs to understand the business. Yeah? There's well-prioritized IT projects, demonstrating leadership. Now, the inhibitors quite often lack a close relationship, not prioritizing well, failing to meet commitments, etc. This is one of the challenges from a strategic alignment perspective. This following chart basically gives you an idea, and this is coming from the BRM Institute. And you can look at this from a lot of different ways, and I'm not going to go through all the details here because this can be a 20-minute discussion even easily or longer. But the key thing is you can have different levels of how demand from the business is actually met by the supply from the IT organization. If we see that, we can have different levels. And quite often in a lot of organizations, we see business needs on level 1, very foundational systems, very operational information. We have a finance system, we have a simple, maybe even ERP system to capture basically workflows, to what we do in workflows and to capture what we're currently doing. The IT focus quite often from a supply side perspective is then often providing those basic systems, stabilizing operations and support, and very much IT management fundamentals. A lot of organizations, IT organizations, are still on that level where the business just wants support from a foundational system and IT is just providing that part of the operations. When we go to one level higher, we start to see the need in the business, the demand in the business for better management information. Yeah, we quite often start seeing, instead of just transactional systems, we start seeing information requirements. We want to make sure that we have a better understanding what is happening in the business. We often start seeing some redesign in the business. IT needs to grow with that, and quite often that's where you build your IT credibility. Now, to be able to define and design more complex IT systems that support those business needs, you need to start establishing enterprise architecture. You need to start looking at, okay, how can we respond to the needs of the business? Eventually you get to level 3, where you look at business growth and innovation, business integration, etc. And then you start looking at the level 3 IT focus is very much business and IT are converged or fused. They need to work very well together, enabling the flexibility and agility what we're actually looking for. When you look at this level of maturity, some of your business units, and this is quite often used for as a discussion point for a business unit, where you start looking at, okay, yeah, there is a business need for high growth and innovation. We want to do this, we want to do that. IT, though, is on a lower level. And quite often what we see here, that if the demand is higher than IT, there's all different kind of things can happen. Quite often they're very irritated by the IT organization because they don't meet their needs, the demand needs, etc. And what we start seeing is we realize that they start building their own shadow IT organization. Why? Because they require the growth. On the other hand, other business units in the same enterprise might still be very much focused on those foundational systems. And when you see the two differences, you will have business units that are very much demand focused, very high level. IT needs to support that. And you see the very low levels that still need to be supported. So the key thing is, and I'll come back to this slide later on, but it's for me, this is one of those areas where we need to start looking at how can we really making sure that when we build a relationship that we don't even not only have a good relationship with the business, but also that we're on the right level what we're talking about. And that is one of the challenges for business relationship management. Now, I talked about BRM love, etc., and the title basically says that yeah, we need to have some lubrication. For me, it's if you want to improve the relationship with the business. So if you want to improve that business IT alignment, you need someone that can lubricate that relationship, that can help you in making sure that it goes smoothly. And that is one of the things that we're going to see as the role that is going to be important. Now, let me talk about the role. The business relationship manager role is, it sits at the intersection of the service provider and the business partner. We can talk a lot about business IT alignment, but we have to assign someone this role that says, okay, you are going to manage that relationship and all the different communication that is happening between the service provider and the business partner. It should help the business in stimulating that and surfacing that the demand, shaping that business demand for maximized value. The key thing, it's all around making sure that we have the right value for the business. And quite often what you see is that this business relationship manager is a member of both the business and the provider management teams. So a business relationship manager, it needs to be defined as a role. Quite often you see that as a very strategic role, but you can also have it as a tactical role. And I'll come back to that later on. Now, one of the things you need to start looking at then, okay, what do we need to do? What kind of questions do we need to ask? And I'm just going to go through some questions that you can ask. But the first thing is the activities that this business relationship manager actually needs to fulfill. We need to look at the demand shaping, aligning business expectations with service provider offerings and the service portfolio. I'll come back to what the portfolio really means here, but the key thing is we need to understand what the business expectations are. Do they need the highest level of provisioning? Do they really want innovative solutions, or do they just want to have very simple solutions and say this just needs to work? It's a very simple system, and that's all we're going to do. Exploring, identifying and rationalizing demand. How are we going to explore that? What are some of the new ways we can actually generate demand? Ensuring that the service provider understands the value, outcome, cost, and risks from a servicing perspective. I think one of the challenges we often see is that we start servicing without really understanding what the business actually requires. And then, of course, value harvesting. One of my challenges quite often is we can build the best IT systems, but if the business is not using the system to their full potential, it's not going to help you, so you have to make sure that even in this role, making sure that we start looking at, okay, what is the real value? Okay, how do we realize this value? And this is coming back also to, for instance, COVID, where we're looking at benefits realization, etc. We also need to reduce waste. Yeah, we've seen too many IT organizations where we're just driving towards delivering systems without really understanding where the value is for the business. So for each of these, I'm just going to go through a couple of questions that you can ask yourself. How does demand enter the value chain? Yeah, how do we actually understand demand? How do we actually start with the demand and understanding what the business needs? One of the biggest challenges, I think, in a lot of IT organizations is how are decisions made when demand exceeds supply? We often see that, we always hear the business has more demand, he has more demand for that, more demand for that. The key thing is we need to start looking at, okay, well, if we can't do it, do we need to actually outsource it? Or do we need to outsource other parts so we actually can generate more supply? This also means that you need to start looking at how are we going to make those decisions, quite often through an understanding what kind of services we offer. How do we handle demand changes? Yeah. What is the backlog of demand tracked? Yeah. How much backlog do we have? In the exploring side, we can look at what demand is not on the radar and what should be. How much can we invest in exploring? How do we break down demand in workable initiatives? So when we start exploring is that talking to the business, not only about, okay, we have these current systems, and yes, we have these projects in the pipeline, and this is what we're going to actually deliver, but is that really what they need at this moment? What is demand they actually have? And often in the exploring phase, we start to realize that why did shadow IT, for instance, come up? Because there was a demand that was not serviced or not explored by IT, and someone else did the exploring. So the business will innovate despite IT sometimes, and how can we innovate while operating the current services? And that is, I think, one of the challenges we see. And that drives into, okay, can we have multiple suppliers in place to be able to handle that? Servicing, how can we make sure that the value is realized? How do we make sure that the service provider understands the value of the services they deliver? And how do we maximize that business value? Again, coming back to, we have to get to a point where we understand from an IT service provider perspective, and then specifically if we go to IT service management, how do we maximize business value? Yeah, how do we understand cost and risk? How do we understand the value? The last one of the activity sets basically is the value harvesting. When you look at, for instance, lean IT, you start looking at waste, for instance, in IT. The key thing is that whole value chain. How do we reduce waste? How can we take things out of our IT service provisioning that provide just waste? How do we make sure that we have the right stakeholders participating? And how is that value measured and monitored? Now, I know I put a lot of questions around here, and the reason why is because for me, those are questions that a lot of people actually maybe have not asked themselves. Yeah? Have you thought about these questions? So start asking those questions when you're specifically from a BRM perspective, of course, but even when you're in working in an IT service provider, not even in a business relationship management role, do you know what the value is and which stakeholders are participating in that? Now, when you have a role that you address and say that is going to be the relationship component, basically, or are accountable for making sure that the relationship is managed through the organization, you need to start looking then at the role clarity. You have different IT groups. I think I've seen too many, and you might wonder why there is someone here with a sword, but I've seen too many situations where one IT group actually says, well, we don't want to talk to the BRM group because they're just we have the relationship, etc. So we're just cutting them off basically at the before they actually start building that relationship. Yeah, the key thing is, as an IT service provider, we have someone who is accountable for that relationship building. That means that the other IT groups need to be able to understand what does this actually mean. And I'm not saying that all the communication and the relationship is the full responsibility of the BRM, and I think that's far from it. The business relationship manager is the role that builds that the relationship through the life cycle. And one of the things I'm going to briefly show here is the role of the BRM compared to some of the other groups. Now, what I did here, and this is very high level, and you can argue about lines, etc. That's not, for me, this is more a discussion than anything else. But if you look at the left here, you have the service status, and some of you might be familiar with this. These are the status that is defined in ITIL, from how a service goes from requirements, definition, analysis, etc., all the way to retired. When I look at who's doing what, we often see, for instance, at the requirements phase, business analyst is involved. We have enterprise architecture that is involved in those first stages of that service. We often see project management starting from the start with the requirements and the definition and chartering it, all the way managing it through operation life. We then see application development in design and development, etc. And we see application management maybe more on the operational life and retiring side. We have a service desk that is more from release to retiring might be involved. We see service level management, and you can argue that service level management should be starting earlier, but it's mainly looking at when we release new services, what are the service levels and how is this working operational and live. The problem is the relationship with the business goes in and out of different groups in the IT service provider, and it is not managed from an end-to-end perspective, not from cradle to grave. And when we see the role of BRM, the business relationship manager, we often see that we start with requirements to maybe development or so that they're involved. But a real BRM should be involved in the overall life cycle of the service. Now, I fully agree that in the beginning, there is more strategic component. And if you have a really strategic focused business relationship manager, most of your work might be done during those initial phases, from requirements to chartering it and to designing it. But later on, there are things that need to be checked from a BRM perspective. You might be involved in some of the testing, getting the people actually to, for instance, the users actually to do user acceptance testing, but also validating that the service actually delivers the value, all the way to operational and live. I fully understand that a major incident, if that happens, that is handled within the IT service provider through major incident coordination, etc. But if you are a BRM and you're managing that overall relationship, you want to know that it actually happened. You might not be involved unless you say, well, we need to do this and this and this because this is the effect on the business. Get the information. Why is it in the connection you have with your VP, where you're talking about new requirements, etc.? That VP is not going to talk about strategy if there's all different kind of issues in operations. So the role of the BRM needs to be focused on the overall life cycle, and that's why I say the accountability quite often for relationship management should be run through the overall service life cycle. The other groups will do a lot of the work and the communication, and they might be responsible for some of the activities. But there needs to be a very good working relationship with the different groups to make sure that we're managing this service correctly. So that is for me the role of the BRM. Now you can have strategic and you have tactical BRMs, and that's you can have a group basically where some of them are more on the focused on the later stages of the life cycle, and some of them are more on the tactical issues, and you have a strategic that is overseeing that with more from the requirements. So you can have different options, etc. The key thing is to be able to understand that everyone in the IT service provider need to actually look at, okay, how do we communicate? What are we communicating? And making sure that the business relationship manager is aware of that. Now, one of the things, and I think the challenges in a lot of organizations, and when we start talking about portfolio management, when you talk about strategy in an organization, you need to understand what services you deliver. And to be able to actually capture that, you need to have a very clear understanding. How are we going to make sure that we have the right definition of those services? There is a lot of different ways you can look at that. Now, I used here, as from a BRM perspective, the application development and the project management side, etc. And quite often we have, for instance, projects or project portfolio. What I want to look at really is the complexity of that, because it's not as easy as we quite often think it is. If I look at the same service status through the life cycle, you do have a portfolio, and quite often we see it as projects, and I don't like it. It's really portfolio management, but quite often we say, yeah, we have a project portfolio. To be honest, a portfolio is an overview of all the investments you're going to make, understanding how that links to certain programs you have in place, and then on a very detailed level you get to projects. Often the strategic BRM might be way more focused on the portfolio side of of this, and less maybe interested in the detailed projects. And quite often we see that sometimes BRMs get pulled into projects which they shouldn't be, because that is part of the project management role. Now, we on the IT service management side, we often have what we call the service portfolio. And then we often break that up in service pipeline, service catalog, and retired services. So two different sets of definitions that often gets confused, because in the PMO maybe, or in the portfolio management office, program management office, we're talking about, yeah, we're capturing all these projects and how they link to and how they are part of all these different programs, and this is all the investments we're still working on that have not even gone into programs, and that's my portfolio. Quite often there's a certain clip level to actually get through that, yeah, and a project quite often as a lowest component often has a certain like $100,000 before it actually becomes a project. Anything below that is not really seen as a project. In the service portfolio side, we often, and in the IT service management side, we often say, well, everything needs to go in the service pipeline because these are all the different services. But some of these things in the service pipeline, so the things that are in development, that we're thinking about, that we're talking about definitions, etc., become projects. Some of these never actually enter a project stage. They might just be done, and there might be some chartering and design and development and build and test, etc., but it needs to be managed in the pipeline. Quite often there's a financial difference between that. So now in service catalog, where it's what is live and what is in production, and how that's being managed, that quite often from build, test, release, and operational. And then of course you have your retired services. So again, what we see here from an investment perspective, from the portfolio, we quite often look more at the everything that before it goes into operations. When we look at the service portfolio, we see that it really links from the requirements definition all the way to retired. So again, when we look at portfolio management, it's important to know the whole structure. You can't just say, I'm only looking at the investments in the portfolio from a program and project perspective. I also need to understand the investments in the service pipeline that have never become project but are being executed there. So we often see that the portfolio management is really important from a BRM perspective. Now, looking at all this, I've looked at the role of the business relationship manager. I've looked at, how they need to work together with all these groups. When I said they sit within the business and within IT, they're really that facilitator, orchestrator, to make sure that all the parties actually work together, that all the information is available to the right people, and that they manage that relationship with the business. And one of the things I keep telling organizations, it's a very important role to have, to be able to actually get to the business IT alignment. And I'm just bringing this slide back from earlier. We need to start looking at how can we align this business and IT needs. That means we need to understand what the IT service provider is doing, what kind of services we are delivering, what kind of services we're not delivering, what the business needs are, what the demand is from the business. And if a business unit wants to grow and innovate, how are we going to serve that as an IT organization? Which groups are going to serve that? There is a difference and there's the two colors basically. The bottom part is quite often what we call a tactical BRM, business relationship manager, that is more focused on foundational systems and maybe starting to look at some management information on the business side, but is very much focused on a very stable IT organization. The moment you start looking at the strategic importance of IT for the business, that's when we really start looking at the top half of this, and then we need to have a more strategic BRM. The problem we often see and in organizations is that if you're in the strategic role, you quite often get to the point where, yeah, it's all great, we're talking about innovation right now, but I really want you to help out in this project because there are some issues there, and we know you've done projects in the past, so can you help there? And that is quite often they're pulling you back to a tactical level. And that's one of the challenges we see with some of the BRMs. But if you really have a strategic BRM and maybe in addition some tactical BRMs as one group that manages that relationship with the business and making sure that all the different IT service provider groups are aligned and understand what is actually happening, and understand that role of the BRM. The BRM is not there to take over their work. The BRM is there to actually make sure it works smoothly. And I know the presentation is called Business IT Love Requires Lubrication. I think in most cases this is exactly what it is. You need to make sure that you have an IT service provider and all different kind of things happening on the business side. The BRM role is to make sure that works smoothly, that there is sufficient lubrication, that the right groups actually are working together. And I won't go into any more detail on this image. That gives me a little bit of time for questions, if there are any questions. I'm just going to have a look at that. And I don't see any questions at this moment. So if you want to connect with me on Twitter, feel free to do that. I will definitely answer some of your questions there. If there's no other questions, then thank you very much and for your attention, and I'm looking forward to further communicating with you.